Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of AA Entertainment, and we'll be kicking off this week by discussing 5 incredibly grotesque and disturbing elements from the book that were kept out of the film. However, I will only be discussing fictional books and books that I personally have read, so yeah, just a heads up, there won't be any V.C. Andrews or Stephen King's It. At number 5, Stephen King's Misery. We all know and love the classic horror film Misery, directed by All in the Family's meathead, Rob Reiner, which was based on Stephen King's chilling novel. The film is incredibly bleak and disturbing and unsettling, and even as an audience we feel trapped, violated, and victimized just by watching Kathy Bates' nefarious Annie Wilkes subjecting James Caan's Paul Sheldon to psychological and physical torture, including the infamous scene, which never gets easier to watch, in which she hobbles the novelist's feet as punishment for trying to escape. Now in the film, this is accomplished by placing a wooden block between Paul Sheldon's ankles and then smashing both of his ankles with a sledgehammer. Before I tell you what happens differently in the book is incredibly disturbing and really fucks you up, as Stephen King puts you in the shoes or bed of Paul Sheldon, and we even come to understand he is no stranger to abuse, having suffered much abuse from his mother. Now, if that hasn't upset you enough, in King's novel, Annie Wilkes takes a fucking axe and amputates one of Paul Sheldon's legs and cauterizes it with a blowtorch. It even goes into further detail describing how his now amputated leg is still twitching as it's carried out of the room. At number 4, Stephen King's Apt Pupil. Featured in the anthology Different Seasons, which includes such novellas as The Body and Rita Hayworth in The Shawshank Redemption, Apt Pupil is unsettling in a much more cerebral way. There are no monsters and serial killers in the traditional sense. Instead, we have a hormonal teenage boy, the all-American model male student that America fetishizes, who comes to discover a neighbor of his is actually a former Nazi who worked at a death camp and sent Jews to the gas chambers. The young boy becomes obsessed, borderline sexually, and begins to admire the Nazi Party ideology. As disturbing as the ending to the book is, especially in comparison to the film, there's one passage that director Bryan Singer rightfully kept out of the film, even though there was no way in hell any filmmaker would put it in. In the novella, Todd Bowden has a sadistic fantasy in which he sees a younger version of SS officer Kurt Dusander experimenting on a young Jewish girl with an electric phallic apparatus. Yeah, brought to you by Stephen King, the author of It. And the less said about that, the better. At number 3, William S. Burroughs' Naked Lunch. In 1991, visionary and Freudian body horror director David Cronenberg adapted the infamous beatnik novel into a film with talking bugs that are designed to look as sexual as possible. In 2014, this jagoff watched the film, and in 2022, this jagoff decided to read the book since he is such a big fan of the movie. And boy oh boy are the two worlds apart. There really are no particular scenes that make this book shocking, but instead the entire fucking book is chock full of grotesque and unusual homo and heterosexual erotica that only the likes of the Marquis de Sade, Bret Easton Ellis, and John Saul can get their rocks off to. And also Lars von Trier. He's a dangerous and disgusting person. In the classic Simpsons episode, Nelson remarks coming out of the movie theater that there were at least 2 things wrong with the title. In the book, I can guarantee you can find both words are apt, depending on what you define as lunch. At number 2, the Marquis de Sade's 120 Days of Sodom. Before y'all call me disgusting and perverted, you're absolutely fucking right. But no, not in this case. Let's be honest, for those of you who watch this channel, I can safely bet y'all own at least a handful of Criterion Collection DVDs. And amongst the extensive collection, who the fuck can possibly pass over Pasolini's infamous 1975 film Salò? While Salò is loosely based off of the Marquis de Sade's novel, as well as elements of Dante Alighieri's Inferno, the film sure as hell puts the Sade in sadistic. Now of course I have seen this film, and of course I just had to read the book the film was based off of. Well, how bad can it be? Those were the last sweet and innocent words of a naive 19-year-old Alexander Petrie. Salò is vanilla in comparison to the source material. Anything and everything that a serial killer or sexual deviant could possibly consider arousing is described in the most intense detail in the book, and it is not at all recommended reading for anybody who's planning on eating that day, or week, or year. For today's episode, we won't be getting one, but two honorable mentions. For our first honorable mention, Robert Bloch's Psycho. In 1959, the master of suspense Alfred Hitchcock gave the world a fun-filled and slightly comical adventure called North by Northwest, which just breathed Hollywood. The very next year he gave us Psycho, a low-budget production about an incel who dresses up in women's clothes, has an intense and obsessive Oedipus complex, and keeps his mother's decomposing corpse in a fruit cellar, and brutally stabs anybody to death who threatens to get in the way of him and his mother. In one of the most shocking twists in all of cinema history, our leading lady Janet Leigh is brutally stabbed to death in the shower by a faceless figure. In the book, however, this particular shot would have been pretty difficult to accomplish, seeing that she wasn't necessarily stabbed to death in the book. Her fucking head was chopped off. For our second honorable mention, Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So this one's a bit tricky because while Quentin Tarantino's latest film did start off as a novel, it was first released as a film and then as a novel. To be honest, I'm a huge fan of Quentin Tarantino, and I very much did enjoy the novel. It's really worlds apart and pretty much serves as a character guide to the characters and keeps out a huge chunk of story elements that were added to the film, including the climax and ending. But that is where we get to this next entry. Remember Pussycat, the Menton chick who offers to pleasure Cliff Booth and takes him to Spawn Ranch? In Tarantino's novel, we learn a whole lot more about her character, including one particularly spine-tingling chapter detailing a hazing ritual / training exercise in which she is forced to sneak into the home of an elderly couple, strip completely nude, and just mortify the elderly couple. The entire scene is absolutely hair-raising no matter which perspective you're observing, and knowing what we all know about the Manson family just makes it all that much more disturbing. At number 1, Bret Easton Ellis's American Psycho. Apparently, after reading John Saul's 1977 novel Suffer the Children, Stephen King said something along the lines of, "This guy needs to be locked up." And yes, I agree 100% with that statement, and I didn't even read the novel. However, I thought that exact same thing, except I applied it to one Bret Easton Ellis, who wrote the incredibly controversial novel American Psycho. Now, I'm a huge fan of both the book and the movie because I've met people who are exactly like Patrick Bateman. I mean, these guys walk and talk and even sound exactly like Christian Bale's performance, including some of his more grotesque quotes. Apparently cannibalism and rape and murder simply weren't disturbing enough for Mr. Ellis, and outside of the incredibly graphic and gruesome depictions of scenes that were kept in the film, there are numerous chapters that are kept from the film that I personally won't describe here. And no, it's not because I'm too chicken shit of the YouTube algorithm, because I don't get paid for this. But it's because I simply am uncomfortable with describing those scenes. Cannibalism, necrophilia, and mutilation aside, there are incredibly unsettling passages involving animal cruelty, violent acts of racism, misogyny, and anti-Semitism. I like disturbing, but I also am sane enough to know where to draw the line, and Bret Easton Ellis is truly a sick and twisted and disturbed individual. Thank you all for watching this, and let me know in the comment section down below which film adaptation kept some really disturbing elements from the book out of the film. Thank you all for watching this, and I'll see you all next time.